So thanks for joining us, guys. Today, Thomas and I wanted to take you through a presentation on how people are moving from data center to cloud, and what that means in terms of the shifts in architectures at some of the building blocks, as well as there we go, as well as you know, a methodology for doing this at the workload layer. So with that. I'm James Labocki, by the way. I work on RHTE. I'm the infrastructure business unit.
And I'm Thomas Cameron. I'm the chief architect for the central region of the United States.
All right. So there's really four areas that we're seeing shifts in IT architectures. And those are in the infrastructure space, the platform space, the business and middleware services space, and in IT operations management. So typically, a lot of these are often siloed in the past. So the infrastructure team's going to work with the platform, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and the thing that we have to really be aware of is that in a lot of our enterprise customer spaces, these are not only siloed, but in many cases almost adversarial. So one of our goals is to get eventually the developers and the operations folks to come together so that they can adopt a DevOps model and move into a cloud computing environment. So we have to be very sensitive to those lines, and we also have to be sensitive that we have to educate our customers so that they can move into a cloud computing model using DevOps.
All right, so let's jump into these four areas of shifts in architecture. So, Tom, do you want to take infrastructure?
So historically, on the left-hand side, you see that we've got the typical stack. You've got a very expensive network that's typically physical plant infrastructure. On top of that, you have very specialized hardware, typically very expensive storage, potentially running virtualization on top of it to support the operating system at the very top of the stack. It's a very expensive environment. It's a very specialized environment. And the goal here is to move over to what you see on the right-hand side as an infrastructure as a service, where instead now we've got inexpensive commodity hardware running an infrastructure as a service platform, including storage, software-defined storage, software-defined networking, and software-defined operating systems. Really, I mean, having operating system response or capabilities on top of that. Sorry, I'm being told to slow down. I speak a little bit too quickly. So the goal here really is to try to drive operational efficiency. When we talk about infrastructure as a operations, some of the challenges include we really need to try to drive down operating expense operating efficiency to drive additional operations efficiency and to drive capital efficiency. So we're not spending as much money, or our customers are not spending as much money on infrastructure. When we do move from a traditional hardware-based infrastructure that is very specialized and very expensive into a software-defined infrastructure, we're going to make things a lot more easily automated. So, and then we're also going to drive costs down by using commodity software and commodity technologies.
Yeah. So, and by the way, if you guys have your sketch pads, you could certainly try and sketch some of these concepts out. You don't have to get as detailed as you want, but it'd be great if you follow along. Hopefully, a story that you'll be able to tell with your customers from a portfolio level of what's going on. So at the platform space, we're seeing a shift from people deploying platforms to really moving towards an application platform as a service. So this is really beneficial in a couple of ways. On the left-hand side, when you had your traditional platforms, these applications were deployed on a separate operating system. And Thomas and I were talking about this, and I joke that this is because of Windows, right?
Thank you, Microsoft.
So basically, but with the advent of virtualization, it's kind of become commonplace for people to deploy a single application to a single operating system. So you might have, on the left-hand side, a database, middleware, and web tier, all on separate operating systems. Now, with virtualization, you get some efficiency there, right? Because you can do, KSM or kernel single-page merging and save some of your memory footprint, but you're not getting all the efficiency because you still have multiple operating system copies. You still have the operational cost of maintaining those operating systems, right? Even if it's fully automated, there's still some sort of overhead in that. The other thing is that those pieces, the database, middleware, and web tier, are non-standard. That means every time they're deployed, they're customized. So when a developer asks for a resource, He gets it completely customized, has to customize it his own way. In the application platform as a service base, what we're gaining is the ability to basically containerize all those workloads onto the operating system so that you can actually gain a huge amount of efficiency as far as resource utilization. But the second piece that you're getting is, well, there's really three values. The second piece is really the standardization, where now that middleware database, or you see the different applications, the containers here, those are standardized. So when the developer starts to ask for those across my enterprise, they're all getting the same version, right? So it kind of lets you snap a chalk line on your architecture higher up. And then finally, it's more automatable, because now that while on the left-hand side I might have been using configuration automation software to automate the deployment of maybe a JBoss middleware server, on the right-hand side, that's built into the platform. I don't have to worry about how the automation of that specific middleware application server is deployed.
So if you look at where we're going, we've done platform as a service. That's here today. But our goal is with XPaaS, X Platform as a Service, where X is any one of the application suites from our middleware environment. So whether that is application services or in-memory computing, application integration, continuous integration a la Jenkins or Maven, or even something as complicated as business process management with a rules engine and complex event processing. The goal is to have, as an XPaaS platform, the ability to have all of the services that an enterprise user would need as essentially cartridges that you can plug into your platform as a service environment. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you see really our goal is to have discrete units where you have operating system, your application platform as a service, and then on top of that, XPaaS components.
And finally, the last kind of fundamental shift before we dive into the workload space is really around IT operations management tooling. So, on the left-hand side, you've got your traditional tools. These were kind of a jigsaw puzzle of different vendors that you're working with in different spaces. So I might be using one vendor for config management, one vendor for the CMDB, another for capacity management. And while that worked really well on the traditional IT architecture, on the right-hand side, you'll notice that what's happening is those are kind of being supplemented by really a cloud management platform. So the purpose of the cloud management platform is really to stripe across all the different whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, it will stripe across those and provide common management. Alongside, and really, it's not to say that the IT operations management tools would be replaced, but really it's about supplementing them with the cloud management platform. So the cloud management platform will have a deeper understanding of each of those layers, and it also won't be tied to tied to software as opposed to maybe driven by hardware vendors, where you might be getting your CMDB from a vendor that also has a hardware platform you're integrating it with. The cloud management platform typically sticks to the software side.
And so here is where we want to get customers to today, and really where we have capabilities today, and that is the entire stack, all the things that we've talked about so far, abstracting from an infrastructure layer. If you look on the bottom left side, again, what we were talking about earlier, commodity hardware with software-defined everything, storage, networking, and operating system provisioning and capabilities. And then you have the application platform as a service layer, where again you've got your operating system, and upon that you have sort of containers or cartridges where you have whatever your middleware suite is, whether it's JEE or Node.js or Python or really anything connected to a back-end database. And on the top part, of course, what we talked about earlier, the XPaaS, where now you have the more advanced capabilities of integration services or business process management, mobile capabilities, in-memory caching, whatever. And on the right-hand side, you see the orchestration and management components that are critically important to having an open cloud environment. So, your orchestration layer, governance, provisioning, And enterprises are demanding chargeback and look-back capacity planning, the ability to do right-sizing, things like that, and have a service catalog. These are all the components that make up an open cloud, but really we need to extend that. This is really talking about capabilities for a customer behind their firewall, but that's not all that customers need. They really need to move out into an open hybrid cloud.
Yep. Yeah, so while the platform, the next generation IT architecture really looks like what we have just shown you, the infrastructure as a service, the application PaaS, XPaaS, and the cloud management, the reality is that customers need to be able to leverage public and third-party providers. They need to be able to broker out to public clouds as well as leverage physical virtual infrastructure as a service. And they also need to integrate with their existing IT operations management toolsets. And so this is really what, when we get to Open Hybrid Cloud, what it begins to look like. All right, so now the real question, what about the workloads? Thomas and I were talking about earlier about how, how virtualization occurred in the industry, and really what you saw was, VMware come on really strong in the virtualization market, and they built a great platform for virtualization, but one of the things that they did really well is that they made it very easy for people to move their workloads from physical systems to virtualized systems, right? And this was kind of a real key, because if all we do is build out the next generation IT architecture and tell people to use it, we might be in kind of a world of hurt, right? They'll either have to redesign everything onto there. So really, we need to look at the conversation from a workload standpoint. So as far as workloads go, there's really kind of 4 areas inside of the Open Hybrid Cloud that are presenting themselves around lifecycle management for workloads. There's 4 real benefits. First is faster instantiation. So whereas in traditional IT it would take months to spin up an entire environment for a developer, in the Open Hybrid Cloud with VMs it might take hours, if not minutes, and with containers we can now do that in seconds. Right? So the lifecycle management capabilities there are really critical. Now the second is around auto-scaling. So whereas the auto-scaling in traditional platforms was typically handled in 2 ways. One, the application developers would have to build into their application all the auto-scaling capabilities, and then they would oversubscribe the systems for it and let it scale. Or the operations folks would have to kind of shoehorn in some sort of auto-scaling by monitoring the application performance and then spinning up more resources. Well, the Open Hybrid Cloud is actually presenting a real possibility of using the platforms and the capabilities of auto-scaling built into the platform to start to do that. The third one is around application recovery. This would be whether it's a load balancer failing, a storage node dying, some network being unavailable, being able to detect those and recover them faster because of the fact that everything is defined in software. And finally, greater portability. So being able to define the workloads in a way that allows you to provision them not just on physical infrastructure, but on virtual infrastructure and public clouds, and having that kind of portability across those. So we wanted to break it down into how can a customer actually do this. We kind of developed this way of looking at this by saying they could follow this kind of 3-step plan when it comes to workloads. So the first one is discover the patterns. So they have to look inside their data center and understand what's in their data center and how they can automate that today. So if you look at it, typically you start on the bottom left with installation of the operating system. So how are they doing this piece? How are they installing their operating systems today? We've kind of standardized a lot of that already today around using SOEs with satellite and those sorts of things, but there's a number of different ways. Once they get the operating system laid down, they'll then begin configuring it, whether it's through packages, files, and services. So the question is, how are they doing it in that area? The third area is how do they begin to orchestrate this? So they're instantiating instances, VMs, and containers. How are they bringing those together? How are they deploying kind of a complex application through there? And the fourth is really defining the application layout. So what runtimes do I need? How are they configured? How are they talking together? So once you discover all those patterns, the next step is really to start building a blueprint. Now, what's great about this open hybrid cloud approach is that you can actually build, you don't have to just throw everything away and start blueprinting applications in a new way. You can leverage what's already in your data center to do this. So this really becomes the first step in data center automation. You can begin to look at We begin to look at what's out there and begin to automate the installation of operating systems, the configurations of files and services, the orchestration, the application layout. And you begin to basically build kind of a blueprint for that. This reduces the manual processes and like human errors, so there's already an immediate value, whether they're running on Red Hat's technology or someone else's. And the second piece is that it also starts to capture the self-service aspect. So up until now, the operations team might have just been contacted out of the blue, gotten an email, gotten a spreadsheet notification, maybe a phone call, or they walk over to the desk and asking for the resources. But now we're starting to actually provide self-service through a catalog. And this is important because once we capture that point of the user interaction, we can start to change things without them actually understanding. And that's really what step 3 is.
Or without them being affected.
Right, yeah.
So you can make changes underneath what an application developer or a business unit owner is doing without them.
Yeah, absolutely. Being to optimize it, right? Yeah. That's really what step 3 is, right? That's adding cloud platform patterns to your blueprint. So, we've got these new platforms and infrastructure as a service and paths that have these patterns inside them that we could leverage for things like faster instantiation or auto scaling or recovery. And so what we could do is we could begin to basically evolve from data center automation to cloud automation. And we could provide greater resilience in that we could, as the application platforms, the infrastructure platforms begin to get updated, workflows are more brittle and will break, whereas these patterns provide more compatibility between versions. So we'll give you a little bit of an example of this, of how this will work. And finally, the platforms the cloud platforms that are available in infrastructure as a service and platform as a service provide things like auto scaling and recovery built into them, as opposed to having to be done in a workflow or in a one-off way from operations or developers. All right, so what would this look like? I'll take you through an example. So on the left-hand side on this slide, you see the traditional platforms. This is what we talked about, the vertically scaling infrastructure on specialized hardware. A single application on every operating system. This example has database, Python, and web running on separate operating systems, and all that running it. We want to move these folks over to this cloud platform on the right. Hopefully you guys can all see this, and you don't need a magnifying glass. We'll post the slides after, so if you're squinting. On the right-hand side, under there, you basically want to move them to the cloud platform. So what would this look like if we followed that 3-step kind of plan? Well, the first part would be to basically build out your 1.0 blueprint, if you want to call it that, right? This is figuring out how do I automate that traditional platform. So my goal here is I figure out how I'm deploying my operating systems on top of my virtual machines in my traditional platform. I figure out how my topology descriptions are built and my application layout. And then what I do is I actually advertise that out. So I advertise Blueprint 1.0 out, and now my users can come to the self-service portal, and they can begin to select that, the stack that they want to deploy with. When that request is given, I'm now automating onto my traditional platform. So this is great, right? Because now I've just provided immediate value to the customer, rather than a human going out and typing all this in, standing it up. I'm showing immediate value. Of course, what's really happening there is that's really the cloud management platform using workflow, or maybe it's BPMS, or maybe it's another tool we have in our portfolio doing this. And that's actually configuring storage, configuring specialized hardware. So that might be reaching out to a NetApp and provisioning a new volume. It might be touching a F5 load balancer. That's all well and good, but remember we were talking about how we want to move people to the cloud platform because the workflows in the traditional platform are brittle and they break a lot. And an example would be, I bring out a new F5 load balancer and it has some new functionality in it. And when I install it in my data center, I now have to go back into my workflow engine and change all that workflow that I just spent all that time implementing. So what we would do is we would begin to look at what's running in the traditional platform. We figure out how do I basically rebuild that into my infrastructure as a service. So now the user continues to go to the self-service portal and he requests his resources and he gets them. But unbeknownst to him, maybe you notify him just in case, but unbeknownst to him, we're beginning to optimize his workload to move on to the cloud platform. So this might be moving from a Kickstart-based bare metal system to image-based deployment on instances in my infrastructure as a service platform. I'm not supposed to mention any product. By the way, it should be lots of clapping. No product mentioned.
Notice we haven't said any Red Hat product name yet.
All right. So All right. So,
Right.
all right. So, so if you do pitch this to your customers, they will appreciate that as well. I've experienced it. So now we have, now they're running on their infrastructure as a service platform. So what this has basically benefited you as the operations team, right, would be that you no longer have to worry about standing up all that specialized hardware. You've reduced your cost. You're more automatable as well. So now, when I want to define a new network, I can do that with my network as a service and infrastructure as a service platform, as opposed to going to my F5 or my Cisco switch and doing all those different changes. Right? So now we move on to Blueprint 1.2, which is basically, I now look at the operating system area and I say, hey, this guy's using Python and a database server. Right? Why don't I go ahead and build him a cartridge for that and containerize it? And then I can slowly move him onto the application platform. So the benefit here is that I can start to standardize what my developers are using from a runtime standpoint. I also gain a big amount of efficiency, right? So instead of having a single OS for every app, I have one OS that can handle complete multi-tenancy.
Sorry, we're apparently in the new flight path for this morning, so bear with us as the jets go by.
We're not under martial law, but we're very well protected.
All right, so maybe they're flying to Thailand. All right, and then finally the last piece is really in XPath. So maybe that web tier, maybe that was a mobile application. We can then optimize that, work with the development teams to begin using the mobile paths. And I'll take a break real quick to say this, right? This is not meant to be a point and click migration from traditional platform to cloud platform. This is really to illustrate, behind this would be a lot of operations teams working with developers to understand the needs, understand changes that need to happen to the application for this to work and take place, right?
Yeah, and that's something that we do need to be really clear on, is that this is not, in order to have the type of scalability and resiliency, I used the word too, the resilience, that we're talking about for cloud, this is going to involve software re-architecture. So this is not something that commercial off-the-shelf software is typically going to just plug right into.
Yeah, that's a good point. So there you have it. So you move to your cloud platform now, but it's also important to note that beyond just provisioning the workload onto there, right? There's a whole lifecycle management that has to go along with. So moving users from development to test to production, providing lifecycle management from not only the operating system, but the configuration management, as well as the topology, all the way up to the application tier. That needs to happen as well. And it's something that Red Hat's working on today, right? And down at the bottom, being able to import and export these blueprints is also one of the key things as well. So the goal of being able to import and export the blueprints is eventually be able to get this portable kind of blueprint for how you define your applications, right? So that could be ISVs on the left-hand side, as you see, vendor-authored blueprints coming in. This could be a vendor offering containerized applications for the platform as a service, or templated virtual appliances in the infrastructure as a service space. Then the ability for your own organization in the middle to be able to have kind of this repository at an organizational level to be able to do this. And of course, be able to deploy them on your hybrid cloud.
And so, as we mentioned earlier, we haven't really been talking about products, and that's intentional. For those of you who are going to attend my session later on, selling to the CIO, that is absolutely by design. Customers don't want you to come in and talk to them about, hey, product X has these capabilities. What they're really looking for is for Red Hat to come in, understand the business problem that they're trying to solve, and then come up with a solution to the entire problem set. So now you can look at all of the capabilities that CIOs and other decision makers are interested in, and we can start to plug in products as we talk to those people in the customer organization who are going to be making purchasing decisions about the products. So, from the very bottom over on the left-hand side, we've got our infrastructure as a service, and that's going to involve various components from the Red Hat portfolio, whether it's Red Hat Enterprise Linux as a foundational operating system, or Ceph from the Inktank acquisition, or Gluster. Or as we talk about dynamic networking, we talk about the neutron component of OpenStack. When we talk about virtualization, that can be either traditional data center virtualization with Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, or if they want to do a true cloud computing sort of ephemeral, very elastic environment, we would talk to them about OpenStack. And as we move higher up the chain from infrastructure as a service to application platform as a service, we would talk to them about OpenShift running on top of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Inside of OpenShift, we would talk about the various JBoss applications as part of that platform as a service environment. And as we move above that into XPaaS, that's where we start talking about Red Hat JBoss SOA platform, or Fuse, or Business Rules Management Service, or BPM, Business Process Management Service. So once we have described the capabilities of our solution set, we can certainly start talking about the products that make up the components of that solution, but it's important that we not lose sight of the entire solution. And then over on the right-hand side, the way that we manage and orchestrate that is with CloudForms, and the blueprints that James was talking about earlier, the various versions of the blueprints, can then be components of solution, or components of be it cartridges or however we want to deploy it. Within our CloudForms infrastructure. So we give them the capabilities that they were looking for around deployment, about managing, around right-sizing, instrumentation, chargebacks, all of those capabilities as part of a service catalog that include now those blueprints that we've built based on the discovery that we've had by having long conversations with the customers. Again, we really want to focus on understanding what the customer's business problem is and understanding what the entire solution is going to look like long before we start talking about individual products.
Yeah, and another point on the product side is, if you look at it, if you were to pitch any one of Red Hat's products from a blueprinting standpoint, they all fall short individually, right? So OpenShift provides application cartridges at the application topology layer, but it doesn't understand the infrastructure layer, which Heat understands. And then OpenStack doesn't provide configuration management, which Satellite does, imaging, right? So there's kind of various points that you need to ensure that we can go across the different products in the portfolio.
And when we're having conversations about the products that we have, it's important to remember that each one of the products, whether it's Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Red Hat Storage, all the way up through the really granular capabilities provided in the application portfolio from JBoss, all of those have an upstream project, which actually draws from over 100,000 projects in the greater open source community set. A couple of things that I've learned are that from a capabilities perspective, if you look at the strength that the open source community gives us, I did a little bit of back of the napkin analysis of all of the different products that Red Hat is involved in, and I found that roughly we've had, out of the 100,000 plus projects that we deal with, we've had over 100 million downloads of various open source projects that make up the Red Hat product suite. The reason that that's important is that as we talk to our customers, we can very, very plainly say that with the number of people using the component technologies that make up our products, the rate of innovation is very, very high. And the quality of the software is very, very high as well. Because we've had over 100 million people downloading and banging on this software and not being shy at all about letting us know when things aren't working the way that they expect them to, the power of the open source community is really, really important to the quality and the rate of innovation of the technologies that make up our product suite. Now, one thing that I have found and has been borne out time after time is there are still some decision makers for whom the term open source is not a positive. They are concerned about it, being what they think of from the 1990s, and it's some, guy with a long ponytail wearing Birkenstocks living in his mom's basement. That's obviously not the case with open source anymore, but one of the things that we need to be cognizant of is that there are still some perception issues around open source. So I think it's really important to recognize and to understand and to communicate the power of the community, but put it in terms that are easily consumable by CIOs and IT decision makers.
Yeah, that's a good point. So hopefully, kind of wrapping up, if we were to frame this discussion in, kind of actionable points after this, right? There's really a couple of areas, right? There's the architecture. So this is, you'll notice we talked about in the beginning the 4 shifts in IT architecture. So really, all of our customers fall somewhere in that spectrum. They're either evaluating cloud management, they're either building an infrastructure as a service platform, some of them are building platform as a service, and some of them may be looking at, beyond platform as a service and even higher standardized application services like XPaaS. So we have offerings in all these areas. We have, whether it's Red Hat Cloud Forms and Satellite in the cloud management space, or RHEL OSP, Rev, and storage, Red Hat storage in the infrastructure as a service space, or OpenShift and JBoss middleware in the platform as a service space, or of course the XPaaS offering. We have the capabilities to deliver this. So it's important to know, if you frame the discussion this way with your customer and walk in, you can begin to understand where the opportunities are inside of your customer. The second one is around the workloads. So if we were to deliver all those great products and build the next generation IT architecture for the customer, but don't address how they move their workloads onto there, we face a big chance that the adoption of that new IT architecture is very minimal and doesn't expand. And so whether it's important to know where the customers are in the workload management area as well. So the 3-step process we outlined was really around number 1, discovery, which is, we have offerings from services in there, including things like the IT modernization pathway workshop. So these are the pathway offerings that basically will look into a customer's environment, discover the applications, and determine the best way to modernize them. And certainly moving them onto this open hybrid cloud architecture is in scope for that. And we even have all the way back down to the standard operating environment, which many of you have been probably selling and implementing and working with for years, where we could bring in a satellite and build out an SOE all the way up to this kind of the infrastructure as a service layer, where we're laying applications down in a customized way for customers. The second is really around the workflow. So once we've discovered the workloads, then we have services offerings that allow people to build workflow. And these could be from our middleware consulting side with BPMS consulting. So if they're a heavy Java shop and they already have workflow, they can use BPMS and they can build that out. We've had many customers who've done this. And the other option is to use CloudForms to do this. So CloudForms Consulting come in and build out workflows for automation inside their traditional data center platform. And finally, then they can move into pattern-based deployment. So this again falls into the operational efficiency pathway. We also have a very specific consulting offerings around both OpenStack and OpenShift. OpenStack has, for example, an advanced mentoring program which will teach people how to build, say, heat templates, and then OpenShift has consulting offerings for building out cartridges, as well as platform migration offerings. So with that, hopefully this gives you guys a good idea of how to lay out the entire Red Hat portfolio in a way that's consumable for customers without mentioning products, but mentioning problems and solutions, shifts that are taking place, and then kind of mapping in Red Hat's portfolio to it. I'm really excited. I mean, we have a breadth and depth of portfolio that's unmatched, right? Which is unbelievable. We have the development model that is right? The open source development model, and we have the services offerings and capabilities to bring people to this next generation IT architecture. So with that, I would invite you guys to ask questions, and maybe we could take some questions or.
Sure.
Here. Oh, one last point would be that the slides are available. We can get those to you as well. Yep.
So while we're waiting for questions to come in, one of the things that I did want to point out is that, to James's point, just in the last few weeks, Gartner, which is a huge IT analysis company, has listed Red Hat as one of only, I think, 33 companies that they follow, which has what they call a complex portfolio. In other words, we're not just a niche player anymore. And I think that of the conversations that I have with C-level executives, CIOs and CTOs, and even COOs, that's one of the things that I think we have not done a very good job of letting our customers know, is that we are a complex vendor of software solutions. And if you could take the information that James and I have presented today and really learn how to talk about solutions, and you hear this so often, you hear people saying we need to be a solutions provider, but I think James has done a phenomenal job with this slide deck of talking about how we get there, how we start positioning ourselves not as a vendor of cheap products or a vendor of really good business rules engine, but how we use those components in the build out of an overall solution. I think that's really where the big value is, and I think that's where you have the opportunity to be the most successful. So do we have any questions from the field?
I got a remark from China, and they said, please convey Chinese appreciation for these two sharp guys. So
thank you very much.
Thank you, China.
Thank you.
Awesome. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box that I have.
We're just that good, you don't have any questions for us?
Well, people are pretty much amazed. There's a lot of information out there, and everybody sort of agrees that it's a good one. Especially the not mentioning of the products really lays it out to have that crucial conversation with a CIO or anybody up the level, right? Still, in this tech exchange, we need to break it down ultimately into, obviously Red Hat products that come from open source and make sure the whole thing gets implemented nonetheless.
Yeah.
Might that sometimes be a challenge, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I think we have questions coming in there.
Excellent.
Let's see.
Otherwise, we can get you guys back on track timing.
Yeah, I know that we
No, we're good. We're good.
Okay.
We still have a few minutes left. No worries there. Let's see. We're trying to propose similar story to.
Somebody just walked by and I saw feed at the bottom of the screen.
This is CC from Greater China. We're trying to propose similar story to several strategic customers. The feedback will always be, firstly, wow, then any success reference to prove your story. I guess this is normal feedback amongst regions. Thus, the question is as simple as, is this still a methodology or some real case ongoing?
Yeah. So I'll throw in my 2 cents.
Sure.
Maybe you can have that.
Sure,
so
please do.
I think to me, finding someone who's doing every one of these pieces is difficult, right?
Right.
So you're not going to find somebody maybe top to bottom, but that's really kind of the strength of our story, is the fact that we're interoperable. So certainly when you go in to brief someone as like an introduction conversation, this is a great way to kind of frame that conversation. This is all the things that Red Hat's involved in. It's not meant to be, all Red Hat, right? So certainly, I think one of the slides I had up there, the Red Hat Open Hybrid Cloud slide, that was up there, shows all of our products and where we play. But I think the vast majority of customers are going to have, okay, I'm also running WebSphere here, or I'm also running, VMware, right, or those sorts of things. So I think from a reference standpoint, you're still better off finding out, first presenting this to a customer, and then maybe after that conversation, find out what areas they're interested in, and then find relevant references afterwards. For example, if they're interested in the PaaS area, we have references for OpenShift. If they're interested in, those sorts of things. I agree. It's difficult to find a customer swallowing the pill whole. Right?
So I can speak, I think, to. I have been working with one of the largest retailers in the world. Unfortunately, it's not a public reference, so I can't mention the name. But we just recently did a very, very large deal with them where they are consuming many of the components that we've been talking about today. They are a perfect example of an organization that has already standardized on VMware. So unfortunately, we weren't able to displace VMware, but we have gotten CloudForms in there. They're looking, they have purchased OpenShift. They have purchased many of the software products. So while we're not deploying everything that's on the Open Hybrid Cloud slide, we have absolutely educated them as to the process. And so in answer to the question, yes, right now it's very much a methodology. But we have real successes, and you can certainly talk about a retail customer, a large retail customer. We have examples of large retail customers. I've done some of these components in oil and gas space. We've got, in other words, energy production space. I know that we have financial services and insurance organizations in my region, in the central region of the United States, which, again, have not consumed all of these in exactly this layout, but they're consuming parts of these, and we have done pathways consulting engagements and SOE consulting engagements where we're starting to build a solution based on this vision.
Yeah, I agree. And so, like out on the West Coast, one of our larger customers that did this, they started at the infrastructure layer and they're moving up, and then you have other customers that are starting at the PaaS layer and looking down. So it's important to know what's driving. If the developers are driving the next generation architecture, it's generally going to come in at the PaaS layer or down. If it's the ops team doing it, then it's going from the infrastructure up. So yeah, I agree with you. There's definitely a need for more references across these. Sorry.
And the other thing too that I really want to emphasize is that if you are talking to non-strategic decision makers, if you're talking to a business unit manager or a project manager, certainly that's not a bad thing, but they are only going to look at the part of the Red Hat portfolio that addresses their problem, and their problem in the grand scheme of things, in their company's strategy, may be very small. So I want to emphasize again that this message is a message that is going to need to be delivered to somebody who is a strategic decision maker. If there's any way that you can help your account team get up to the chief information officer or the director of application development or somebody who's looking at broader business problems and not somebody who's working on, I need to deploy 100 servers. So it's a very different message that's going to be delivered at a higher level in the organization. As opposed to a product pitch who's going to happen at a sysadmin level.
Quentin, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we got a question from Harish. I'm not quite sure if I understand it correctly. He says, how would you address the question competition from Google, etc.?
Oh, well, it's a very different use case. So I'm assuming that he's talking about Google App Engine and the capabilities that Google has. So it's actually a very different use case. That is a pure external cloud solution. There are some of the things that Google can do behind the firewall, so you can purchase services from them. But Google doesn't have the ability to do the things inside of your enterprise like we can with the stack that you see on the screen.
And I would also say it's a complementary message, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking about not just open cloud, but open hybrid cloud, right? And so, I mean, if you go back to that, I mean, really, we see kind of GCE and App Engine as being on that right-hand side of being able to move your workloads public and third-party providers. And that happens at both the infrastructure as a service space, whether you're spinning up instances and having that common management plane, or from a containerization space, right, at the PaaS layer. That's why we're working so heavily on the Docker side as well, right? So. Yeah, so I don't know if there's any more questions.
Yeah, there's a few more. Hey guys, thanks for the presentations. These are the kind of slide decks that we use as Ace. We have scripts attached to the deck that helps us with the message.
I do, yeah. So we have it internally. I'll get it to Quentin, and yeah, it takes you step by step, kind of the pros and cons of each one of these in there as well. So we can definitely get that to you. And I would actually, I mean, that's one of the things I wanted to challenge you guys with is, like, if you don't feel comfortable delivering this message, you should feel comfortable delivering this message, right? I mean, this is all of Red Hat's products. This is the vision. It's a notch below the Open Hybrid Cloud sales slides that maybe William presented, but it's a notch above, say, getting into specific product capabilities. And I think that's an area that we don't necessarily always glue together very well. The sales message down to the architecture.
Yep. Right. And Harish is just clarifying a number of things. So it says, we're good to talk about our story as of this presentation versus how Google and Amazon are doing.
Okay.
And he not only meant App Engine, but also Compute Engine.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's actually a
That's a
good
good
point.
question, yeah.
That's a good point for feedback. You know, I haven't gone down and said, how does this competitively stack up to the approach that Google and Amazon are saying? So I guess what you're trying to suggest is if we had this open hybrid cloud slide up, and then the next slide we said, what do the public cloud vendors want you to do? And it just shows all your workloads running there, right? Or just VMware who just wants you over here, you know, just in the data center or here. Yes, I agree. That would be that's powerful feedback.